Hi guys, my name is Sonia. So if you're new to my channel, then welcome. And if you've been watching me for a little while now, I'd like to say thank you so much for all your support. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the current diets that are known to mankind, and we're going to try and see if we can narrow down a best diet, if that exists. Today, I will be talking about the low-carb diet, the keto diet, low-fat diet, the low glycemic or the GI diet as it's also known, Paleo Diet, Intermittent Fasting, Mediterranean Diet, Vegetarian Diet, and also the Vegan Diet. Let's get started because it's going to be a doozy. So from the title, this diet obviously decreases the amount of calories that you consume from carbohydrates, which include breads, grains, fruits, and of course, sweetened products like baked goods. Now, a low-carb diet doesn't necessarily have a strict guideline, but it's usually less or equal to 40 to 45% of your calories from carbs. A lower carb diet in general might be beneficial towards someone who's used to eating an excessive amount of carbs. And if a lot of these carbs are from simple added sugars or refined carbohydrates, such as white breads, white rice, baked goods, chips, then that can really decrease the amount of good HDL cholesterol in our bodies. In addition, it could be there could be an increased risk of weight gain, increased triglyceride levels, and also cavities. You still need to look at the overall picture of your diet, so make sure that you're eating sources of lean protein instead of including a lot of sources of saturated fat. Also, you need to focus on the type of carbs that you are still consuming. Healthy sources of carbs that provide us with a lot of nutrients and fiber, of course, are going to be the fruits, the whole grains like brown rice, barley, rolled oats or steel-cut oats, as well as legumes. So whenever I hear clients trying to reduce their carb intake, it's usually they're talking about going on the keto diet. Now, the keto diet is very low carb and therefore higher fat. So if you thought low carb was low carb, think again. It restricts the amount of carbs, no matter what amount of calories that you need, to about 20 to 50 grams of carbs. Now, 20 to 50 grams is about 1 to 2 pieces of fruit. And the keto diet is used for the intent of putting our bodies into a state called ketosis, which is a state where our body burns fats for fuel. So no doubt that people are using the keto diet mainly for weight loss. Keto diet is very likely to produce those weight loss results. And one of the main reasons is that when we normally do eat carbs, they are held within our liver as a molecule called glycogen. Glycogen is stored in our liver with molecules of water. And once we eliminate carbs, essentially all of the carbs in the keto diet, then we are no longer carrying the glycogen once we have that used up, and we are no longer carrying the water that is stored with it. So a lot of the weight that we do lose in the initial stages is water weight. And the keto diet has been shown to improve blood sugar control, increase our satiety or sense of fullness, reduce blood pressure, increase the good HDL cholesterol, as well as reduce our waist circumference. So a lot of issues arise from the restrictiveness of the keto diet. It's never a good sign when a particular diet or eating pattern makes you completely eliminate food groups. With the keto diet, you don't get the fiber, you don't get the antioxidants, you don't get the vitamins and minerals from the fruits, from the whole grains, and of course not from the legumes either. You also don't get the calcium and vitamin D that you can get from dairy. Now, I know that a lot of people are gonna, hit me up on this. You don't necessarily have to get all your calcium from dairy, but it is one of the easier sources to get it from. It's also not a very sustainable diet overall for the long term. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're all individualized. I've seen it work for some people, but that's not to say it's gonna work for most people. It's gonna be a kind of awkward, maybe hard time to navigate through dinners or through, let's say, luncheons with friends or with coworkers. You might just really return back to your old habits. All the efforts of the keto diet, all the time that you use on the keto diet is going to be for nothing. So because of the restrictiveness of the diet, there can be a high risk of developing eating disorders, or if you know that you yourself have an eating disorder or have had past history of one, I highly do not recommend this diet to you. So how people can do this diet wrong is that they think, oh, low carb and high fat, all the cheese I want, all the bacon, all the meats. That is not true. you still need to prioritize the type of fat that you're eating. So the bacon, cheese, they're high in saturated fat, which if you eat high amounts of that will increase your LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol. What you need to do is focus on the sources of monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So those include olive oil, nuts, seeds, avocados, fatty fish like salmon and sardines. So the low-fat diet focuses on decreasing calories that you have from fats. Again, no strict guidelines. It generally can mean having a fat consumption of less than 20% of your calories. And the foods that contain higher amounts of fats include the fats that we use to cook with. So butter, margarine, canola, olive oils. It can be the meats and meat products that we consume, so beef, lamb, pork, sausages, etc. And also the commercial packaged products, so chips, dips, and also baked goods. Since 1 gram of fat contains less calories than either carbs or protein, lowering your fat intake can help with weight loss. And also it can help with conditions where you might not be able to digest high amounts of fat, and it can help with heart health. So again, the low-fat diet, kind of similar to the low-carb diet, doesn't really mention the quality of the fats. So in addition to lowering your overall fat, you really want to focus on changing the types of fats that you eat and prioritizing, again, the monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Commonly known as the GI diet, this diet focuses on consuming foods that are low in glycemic index only. The glycemic index is a scale where foods that are high in glycemic index can be readily and quickly absorbed in our bodies and can spike our blood sugars, whereas the foods that are lower on the glycemic index scale are going to be absorbed slower and more gradually. And to figure out their place on the GI scale, different foods are tested in whatever serving size that provides 50 grams of carbohydrates. So because lower GI foods or foods on the lower side of the GI scale have a very gradual and more subtle impact on our blood sugars, following the GI diet can be a very good idea for someone who has pre-diabetes or maybe diabetes to really help manage their blood sugar. And in addition, many of the foods that are located on the lower side of the GI scale are high in fiber and more kind of whole, unprocessed foods like whole grains or legumes. So following the GI diet can sometimes eliminate foods that are actually healthy for us. For example, watermelon. So watermelon is really high up on the GI scale, but in reality, 50 grams of carbs from watermelon is like 5 cups of watermelon, and that's not really a realistic serving size. Watermelon can still be a healthy choice if you apply portion control. Intermittent fasting is where you have basically a time slot where you eat, and then the rest of the time you are fasting. You have several different types. There's restricted time fasting, where you have a window of usually less than 8 hours or 8 hours to eat, and then fasting for the rest of the day. You also have alternate day fasting, where you only eat 1 meal a day on fasting days. And then you have the 5-2, where you fast for 2 days, eating as little as 500 calories on those days, and then the other 5 days you eat normally. It's definitely a more flexible version of the kind of lower calorie diet. So instead of eating lower calorie consistently every single day, you are eating normally for some days and then fasting for the other days. This may really work for some people who is too busy in the morning, can't eat breakfast, eats later, or for someone who's actually very busy on some days of the week, but then they can eat properly and normally and calmly for the other days. So what could happen in the initial stages of fasting is that you can get extremely hungry, and then that can lead to overeating and also cravings. Additionally, any type of restriction, again, is very not safe and not a good idea for those who are at risk of eating disorders, or if you know that you have one or have had one before. This is because even though you're not necessarily restricting foods or the types of foods that you eat, you are restricting the times that you eat. And that means that you're not listening to your body. So the main con of this diet is there are many different versions. And because of that, there's no standardized guideline on how we should actually do intermittent fasting. And because of that, there's just a lot of anecdotal evidence and not really any scientific literature to back it up. That's not to say that it doesn't work. I'm just saying that because it's so varied in execution, it's very unclear about the effectiveness of the intermittent fasting. The paleo diet emphasizes fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and lean protein, but having it be organic, cage-free, or grass-fed, depending on the type of protein, but eliminates dairy, grains, potatoes, legumes, refined vegetable oils, processed foods, and also refined sugars. And supporters claim that these foods were eaten by our ancestors before the whole agricultural boom. And once whole grains and legumes came into effect, apparently that was associated with inflammation and the development of chronic diseases. So the good thing that the paleo diet has going for it is that it focuses on whole, unprocessed, fresh foods. Packaged foods and more processed foods, they have a lot of times more calories, more sodium, and also more fat, especially saturated fat, which are not beneficial to our health. And also choosing lean proteins, nuts, seeds, and then fruits and vegetables, having those as a focus can really be beneficial to our health because it's so nutrient dense. So again, not a good idea to cut out entire food groups. Without grains, without legumes, you're cutting out enormous sources of fiber, not to mention vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants from whole grains. Without dairy, you are effectively cutting out sources of calcium and vitamin D. This diet will also be significantly more expensive due to the cage-free, the grass-fed, the organic options that you're choosing for the lean protein. And becoming an agricultural society is beneficial for the planet. The production of animal products, especially beef and lamb, they produce way more greenhouse gases than, let's say, legumes ever will. Also, paleo claims are just wrong. Grains don't cause inflammation, at least not whole grains. There was a 2017 study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and they found that when participants consumed whole grains versus refined grains, then their inflammation actually decreased. And whole grain consumption has been associated with a decreased risk of chronic diseases as well as obesity. The Mediterranean diet mimics the eating pattern of those who live in the Mediterranean countries. So they're very plant-focused. They have lots of fruits and vegetables. They focus on whole grains. They limit the amount of dairy and red meat or meat in general. And they focus on fish as their primary source of protein. And they also focus on healthier fats like olive oil and walnuts. The Mediterranean diet is actually one of the world's most well-known and extensively researched eating pattern, and it has been associated with a reduced risk of chronic diseases such as heart disease, and it has been associated with anti-inflammatory effects. So the main con here would be, again, the price, because olive oil, salmon, walnuts, they can be very expensive ingredients. In addition, if everyone ate like this, there's going to be a very high demand for fish that are on top of the food chain, like salmon, which is not going to be very sustainable for our planet. The research also suggests a synergy of the foods of the entire Mediterranean diet versus having them alone. So if you just add avocado to your diet, well, of course, it's a very good idea because it's very nutrient dense. It might not provide you with the same effects versus if you incorporated and kind of wholeheartedly jump right into the Mediterranean diet wagon. Vegetarianism actually has many different types. They do all exclude red meat though, so beef, lamb, pork, but they can include any combination of dairy, poultry, so chicken and turkey, eggs, as well as seafood. So usually vegetarianism is done by people who want to help manage their health conditions, aim for weight loss, or who simply have a desire for the welfare of animals. Eliminating red meats can really help you to reduce the consumption of processed meats, which has been associated with increased risk of colorectal cancer as well as heart disease. Plus, eating a more plant-rich diet is also better for the environment. Being vegetarian means that you might have to be a little bit creative eating at parties or with other friends or family. But this shouldn't be too hard because there are a lot of restaurants nowadays that have a lot of vegetarian options because it's very popular. Depending on the type of vegetarian that you are, you might have to get a bit smart about how to get your nutrients. For example, iron. Without red meat, it can take a little bit more work just to make sure you're getting all of your iron, but it is completely doable by eating food sources that are high in iron with a food source that is high in vitamin C. So for example, you have some chickpea salad. Now chickpeas have a lot of iron, and to help you absorb that iron, try to have ingredients of the salad containing food sources that are high in vitamin C. For example, red bell peppers, or maybe if it's a more citrusy, fruity salad, adding some slices of oranges in there as well. And just be careful that the way that you're eating is healthy and nutrient dense. French fries and chips, they're technically vegetarian, but they're not exactly what I would call nutrient dense, and they definitely won't support your health. So a vegan diet is one where you eliminate all products that come from animals. So not even just the meats or eggs, but also products that are made from animals. So for example, gelatin, which is made from pork, or honey, which is made from bees. And similar to vegetarianism, veganism can be a way to help manage your health conditions, reach for your weight loss goals, for the welfare of animals, and also environmental sustainability. You definitely get the benefit of limiting red meats, limiting processed meats, which is more important, and also being more environmentally friendly. This type of diet can also be slightly cheaper than other diets because now you don't have to spend that money on animal products. It can be a bit hard to navigate social situations where there's food involved. And one of the tips that I can give you for this is, you know how there's pre-drinking? Well, try pre-eating, which is basically you're eating something at home, and when you get to the restaurant, there should usually be at least one choice that you can choose so that you are eating according to your own desired eating pattern, but also still spending that time with friends. So with the exclusion of all the animal products, it can be a little bit more trickier to get all your necessary nutrients, especially iron and vitamin B12. But with some specific tweaking of the types of foods that you eat, and also with the addition of supplementation, it can be done. So again, just because you might be technically following the vegan eating style, please make sure that you are choosing healthy, nutrient-dense options. I also wouldn't recommend that you go full-blown vegan just like that. It can be a really big shift in your everyday life. I recommend that you go gradually into it, perhaps starting off as a type of vegetarian first, just to get used to the different ingredients, the different recipes, the meal planning and all of those logistics before you potentially decide to move further on. You might also find that there are a bit more gastrointestinal symptoms like bloating or gas because you are eating more of the legumes that you might not potentially be used to. Holy crap, guys, there's so many different diets out there. And these aren't even the entire roster of diets that are out there. There's so many other crazy diets that I haven't even covered. But when did nutrition get this hard? Get this complicated? I mean, no wonder people are so confused nowadays about nutrition. All right, so we went through all those diets, but how do we pick the best one among them? Well, there have been some studies comparing low carb as well as the low fat diet. And spoiler alert, their efficacy is actually pretty similar when you look at it long term. Plus with the other diets, there's pros and cons for each and every one of them. So can we even say, is it even safe to say that there's a best diet out of them? Probably not. But what if we take the best points out of all of them? Well, from low carb to low fat to just plain fasting, we can probably say there's no overindulgence in any macronutrient here. With the low GI and Paleo diet, there's also an emphasis on minimally processed foods, whether or not they do include grains. And the Mediterranean diet and vegetarian and vegan diets place a focus on having a more plant-rich diet. And no, you don't necessarily have to become vegan. So we have eating in moderation, focusing on getting whole, unprocessed foods, and then focusing on a plant-rich diet. I personally think that this is a much better way of having a healthy diet versus excluding whole food groups. And just remember that fanatics out there who are 100% not qualified to make any recommendations on your eating style is still gonna unfortunately be making those recommendations. So if you hear of any new diets in the future, or if you come across any of the diets that we discussed today, please be critical and don't believe everything that you hear. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hoped you enjoyed it and also learned something new and really just get a more clear picture of what these types of diets are, what the pros are, what the cons are, and things that you have to be aware of. And if this video has helped you, please like it. And also, of course, please subscribe for more nutritional content in the future.